Hello guys, so in today's video we are going to talk about solution of a problem which is frequency of limited range array elements. So let us go through the problem statement. So the problem statement says that we are given an array of n positive integer. So an array n is given of n positive integers. The length of the array is n, which can contain integers from 1 to p. So p is also given, and and the array can contain elements from 1 to n. Okay, where elements can be repeated or can be absent from the array. So for instance, here element 1 is missing, and there are certain elements which are repeated. So for instance, 2 is repeated twice, 3 is repeated twice here, and elements 1 and 4 are missing. So that what it says, and our task is to count the frequency of all numbers from 1 to n. Okay, so we have to count the frequency of all numbers from n to 1 to n. So for instance, 2 has occurred twice, so the frequency of 2 will be 2. 3 has occurred twice, so the frequency of 3 will be 2. 5 has occurred once, so the frequency of 5 will be 1. Okay, so count the frequency and make in place changes in the array. So in the same array, so in this particular array itself, we have to store the frequencies here. So okay, so let me explain this. All right, so let's go here and let us take the example. So we are given an array. So array is given to us. An array contains, and in this particular case, the array contains 5 elements. So the 5 elements are 2, 3, 2, 3, and 5. So these are the 5 elements which the array contains, and p is 5. Okay. So what we need to do is that we need to transform the same array such that it contains frequencies of all the elements 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So this should contain the frequency of element 1. This should contain the frequency of element 2. Similarly 3, 4, and 5. So as you can see, 1 is not there in this array, so thereby the frequency is 0. 2 has occurred twice, so the frequency will be 2. 3 has occurred twice, so the frequency is 3. Sorry, frequency is 2. I'm sorry about this. Let me just delete this. Yeah, and 4 has not occurred, or 4 is not there in the array, so it's 0, and 5 has occurred once. Okay, so this is what we have to do. And remember, we are not supposed to take a different array. The same array has to be manipulated so that it contains frequencies. Okay, so now let us look at the solution. So one solution which is very easy, but it requires a little bit of a space, is that what you do is basically you iterate on this array. So we will iterate on this array. Okay, and let us say we are having a dictionary where we are storing the frequency of the element we have listed. So let us say this particular thing contains, so we have a dictionary of 1 to p. So in this case p is 5, so 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. We have such dictionary, and initially the values are 0. Okay, right? Now what we do is that we iterate, and once we encounter that value, we will go ahead and increase the value by 1. So for instance, 2 is there, so we will increase it to 1, right? 0 plus 1. 3 is there, we will increase it to 1. Again 2 is there, so we will increase this to 2. Again we encountered 3, so we will increase it to 2, right? And 5 is there, so this will be increased to 1. Rest all are zeros. So once which we have this dictionary, so let us say we are using an auxiliary space here of order p. Okay, and once we have this dictionary, then what we will go ahead, once we have populated this dictionary, what we will do is that we will again iterate on this array, and this time we will change its value. So we will see, okay, so we are at the first element here, let me just 1 2 3 4 5. So we are at the first element here. Okay, so the first element in dictionary contains value as 0, so this is 0. 2, it contains value as 2, so this will be 2. 3, again it contains value as 2, so it will be 2. 4, it contains 0, so 0, and 5 is 1. Okay, so that is how we can solve this problem. Now let us look at the running time complexity. Well, the running time complexity here is order of n. Okay, and we need an auxiliary space, and how much, what is the space we need? Order of p. Remember, this dictionary is of p length. All right, so this is one such solution, and I hope the coding would be simple for this, but this requires an auxiliary space. Now let us see, can we solve this problem without using auxiliary space? Let us try to explore that. Well, the answer to that question is yes, we can solve this problem without using auxiliary space. So now let us look at the solution, which we are going to code also, and let us see how we can solve this problem without using auxiliary space. So what we can do is, we are given the array. Okay, so our array was what? So our array contains 2, 3, 2, 3, and 5. Okay, this is what our array contains. So what we will do is that we will see we will iterate on the array. So we will iterate on this, okay, on the array, and we will see, and what we will do is that we will go to, let me write down the indexes here. So the index is 1 2 3 4 and 5, and what we will do is that we will go ahead, and so this is at index 2, so we will go ahead and increase the value, or set the value at this index to 1, or we will increase it to increase it by 1, and by doing so we will also go ahead and copy the element at that index 3 to the original index. Okay, I know it's a little bit confusing, let me just go over it and that will make sense. So what I am trying to say here is that, so initially we are at the starting position. Let's say our starting position is 1. Let me just write it down: 1 2 3 4 and 5. Okay, so right now we are consuming 2, element 2, right? So what we will do is that we will see what is the value at element 2, okay, at index 2. So we come to index 2 and we saw that the value at index 2 is 3. Okay, now since the value at index 2 is 3, so what we will do is that first we will go ahead and we will, let us say we store this to temp variable, or let us say we store 3 to temp variable. Okay, and what we do is that we will, since this is the first occurrence, 2 is occurring for the first time, so we will make it -1. Okay, okay, and the value at 3, value at index 2, we will go ahead and copy it over here. So we'll swap it, not essentially swap, but see, 2 has been consumed, and consumed in the sense we know that 2 has occurred once, and at index 2 we went there and we have increased it by 1, or we have make our counter, okay, 2 has occurred one times, that is why we have put it here as 1. 3, we have not consumed it so far, that is why we have copied it over here. Rest of the indexes will be the same, which is 2 3 5. Now in this next iteration, what we'll see is basically this is -1, okay, and so on and so forth. We'll see, okay, this is now 3, so we will go at index 3. So this is 1 2 3 4 and 5. We went at index 3, we saw that index 3 contains 2. All right, so what we will go, okay, so what okay, index 3 contains 2, so what we will do, we'll do the same operation, which is first we will store this 3 into a variable which is temp. So temp will contain 3, okay, sorry, temp will contain 2. So this we are storing at in a temp variable. All right. So 2 is there in the temp variable, and then we will go ahead and third index we will change it to -1. Okay, and then we will copy temp to the original index, which is 2. Rest of the things are 3 and 5, which is fine. Now let's see what happened in the next iteration. In the next iteration, we saw, okay, let me just 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Okay, so again in the next iteration we saw it as 2. So we went ahead and checked the index 2. Index 2 contains negative values, right? And I'll come around why we are using negative values also, but let's see. Okay, so it contains negative values, so we know that this basically contains the frequency of index 2, not the actual element, right? That is why we are using negative values. Negative values simply means it contains frequency, not the actual element. Okay, so we know that it is uh, early we have already encountered 2, and this is the next time we are encountering the second time or third time or fourth time or nth time we are encountering 2. So in such cases we will manipulate this value to 2, and since we have consumed 2 now here, see here there is no swap. Okay, we have consumed it, so we will mark it as 0. All right, remaining indexes are -1, 3, and 5. All right, so now in the next iteration, while doing so, right, while doing so, now once it becomes 0, what we will do is that we will increase the counter to this. Okay, so now our counter is here. Okay, let me just have this -2, -1, 3, and 5. Our counter is here now. Okay, this is 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Our counter is here now. Since the value is negative, what we will do, we know that we don't have to perform any operation and we will move forward. Okay, once if we see a negative value, we don't have to operate on it because it contains frequency, right, not the element. We have to operate on the elements, not on the frequency. Okay, so thereby we just simply increase our counter, and now we are our counter is here again. This is also a negative value, so we will go ahead and increase our counter to here. So now our counter is here. Okay, we are at this position. Okay, and now we will see how we are going to manipulate this. Okay, so our array is basically 0, and let me use this 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. We are at here at index 4. Okay, and this contains 3, so we will go to index 3. Index 3 is a negative value. Since it's a negative value, we will go ahead and increase its value by 1. Okay, or in here we are decrementing its value by 1. So once we decrement it, it becomes -2, and since we have consumed 3, so we will mark it as 0. And next is 5. Okay, again we will go ahead and do it. So this is 0, -2, -2, and this is again 0 since we have consumed it, so we will increase the counter to here. So this will be 0, and that is our right, and then we are at this position, at 5th position. So 5th position we went ahead and we saw that okay, 5 is that. We went to index 5, we store index into temp. Okay, temp has 5, and then what we said, okay, this is occurring for the first time, so I'll make it as -1. And then while we are copying back temp 5 to this position, which is 5th position, we saw that it is -1, which means we are already using it, so we will not go ahead and swap the values or copy the value back to the starting index, and we'll leave it as such. So now our array by end of our iteration will have this, which essentially is the frequencies of each of the elements at its right position. So 2 has occurred twice, so -2, 3 has occurred twice, -2, and 5 has occurred once, so that is -1. Okay, once we have done this, then the last step is very easy. We will iterate on the array and we will multiply all the elements by -1 so as to make the element positive. Okay, so we multiply it by this becomes +2. and this becomes -1, and that is how we do this. Okay, so that's about the explanation part. Now let's jump back to our coding section. So okay, let's see how we are coding this. So let me just go through the coding section. So I've already coded it, and now let us go over the code. So what we are doing is that, so we are iterating on n, right? Index initially is 0, and we are iterating on array. So now if the element is negative, we said that if the element is negative or less than or equals to 0, then we don't have to perform any operation, we just have to move to the next index. So this is what this if condition is all about. All right, now the next condition says that if the index, if the ARR index, the value at index at index I is greater than n, then it is basically, then as per the question we have to skip this. So I'm marking it as 0 and I'm increasing my counter. So if you see here, note the elements greater than n in the array can be ignored for counting, and do modify the array in place. So we can skip this. So that is why we are marking it as 0 and we are moving forward. All right. Okay, so that's about it. Now comes the part which we have discussed. So now there are two things which we have to do. Okay, if the index is array of index is less than n, then there are two things which we have to do. Either we have to simply increment the counter, or we have to set the counter to -1 and swap the values back to the original index, okay, or the starting index. Okay, so let us look at the first case where we have to increment the counter. Okay, so how do we decide whether we have to increment the counter? Well, we decide it by this. Okay, if the value at ARR of index this -1 is basically, since in programming the index starts from 0, so that is why -1. So ARR of ARR index -1 is less than or equals to 0. So if it is less than or equals to 0, that simply means it contains count or the frequency, not the actual element. So if it contains frequency, then we have to just increase, or in this particular case decrease the counter. So that is what we are doing here. We are decreasing the counter by -1, and in this case, since there is no swap, so we have to set this particular, since we have consumed that element, so we have to set it to 0. Okay, and then we increase our counter. Okay, so let us go back to our example to illustrate this point. So I was talking about the increment portion. Okay, so for increment portion, I would say is basically, let us where is that? Okay, so this is okay, right? This is also okay, so let us look at this portion. Okay, let us look at this. Okay, so we have already, so this we have manipulated and this becomes -1. Now 2 -1 -1 and 3 and 5 is the array, and our index is here 2. We saw that 2 is there, and we went into that index and we saw that the index contains a negative value, right? This is a negative value. So this contains a negative value. So we realize that since it's a negative value, so we don't have to swap values, we just have to increase it. So that is why we have increased this value to -2, and we have set this value to 0, and then we move our index counter to the next element. Okay, so that's about the increment part. Now let's go back to our coding section. Now here, if it's not an increment, which means the value is greater than 0, then we are storing the start index or the starting position value to temp variable. Then we are swapping the this value to AR index. Okay, and then the temp value -1, which contains the frequency we are incrementing it by or decrementing it by -1. Okay, so, and remember here we are not increasing, since we are swapping, so we are not changing the index counter. So in all the cases we have increased the index counter, but in this particular case we are not increasing the index counter. Okay, so yeah, once this loop exits, we will have all our we will have the manipulation done, and the array will contain 0 or negative values. Negative values will contain the frequencies. Okay, so this is that, and now this particular loop is just to make the elements on positive elements, so we are just multiplying it by -1. So that's about the coding portion. Now let us submit the solution. Okay, okay, so the solution got accepted, and so that's about the video, folks. If you have any questions or queries regarding this video, please feel free to drop it in a comment and I'll try to address them. Thank you.